Hey gang, this is Deke McClelland. Welcome to Deke's Techniques. This week, we're going to take this text set in Rosario Bold, which is a font that's available from Adobe Typekit, and we're going to turn it into this secret message text. Now you might be thinking, Deke, it's almost Thanksgiving. What's with the... Precisely. You're probably right now working on a secret message for your secret Santa. Here, let me show you exactly how it works. All right, here's the final effect, just so you can see it on screen. I'm going to start off with this file from the Fotolia image library, about which you can learn more and get special deals at fotolia.com/Deke. Now, I'm going to set my text in a type called Rosario, which is available to those of you who subscribe to the Creative Cloud. And you can get it by going up to the type menu here in the most recent version of Photoshop CC and choosing Add Fonts from Typekit. And that's going to go ahead and launch your default browser, and you can see that we're seeing the entire Typekit library at this point. Just go ahead and search for Rosario, if you like. And just to give you a sense of what it looks like and how it's spelled, here it is right there. So it's a good-looking font, and it's going to work great for this effect. All right, then, once you've loaded that font, which only takes a few moments, go ahead and switch back to Photoshop and select the Type tool. Now notice up here in the options bar that the center text icon is already selected in advance, which means my text will be centered. And so I'll go ahead and click with the Type tool more or less in the center of my image window, up high though, because I want to create 2 lines of type. And once you have your blinking insertion marker up on screen, then you can bring up the character panel, which we'll need, by pressing Control-T or Command-T on the Mac. And notice that the font is set to Rosario Bold, which just happens to be the bold style. My type size is set to 240 point. I've set the leading to 204 points. And just so the type fits best inside of this video, I've reduced the horizontal scale value slightly, and I've turned on all caps. And so if you're following along with me, go ahead and do all that stuff, and then you can hide the character panel. And now I'll just go ahead and enter some lowercase characters, and they'll show up as uppercase, of course, because I selected that icon in advance. And I'm going to go ahead and truncate the word answers like so. And now inside of Photoshop CC, you can accept your text and create a new independent text layer by paradoxically, it seems to me, pressing the escape key. Now, if you're wondering, well, gosh, what if you want to escape your changes? For example, what if I get rid of a couple of characters here, and then I think better of it, I want to abandon my changes, then you now press Control period or Command period on the Mac. Now, I want to adjust the kerning of the text, so I'm going to bring back up my character panel. This time I'm going to have to click on the icon because I don't have any text active. And I want to change this kerning value right there from metrics, which is the default setting, to optical. And that's going to give me better results with this very large text. And now I'll go ahead and hide the character panel once again. Now I want to center my text inside the canvas, so I'll press Control-A or Command-A on the Mac to select the entire canvas like so. And then I'll switch to the Move tool, and I'll click on the Align Vertical Centers icon, and then I'll click on Align Horizontal Centers up here in the options bar. Now press Control-D or Command-D on the Mac to deselect the image. That's very important. And the letters look a little high, so I'm going to press Shift-Down arrow in order to scoot them down 10 pixels. All right, now we're going to blur the letters, and we could do so by converting the letters to a smart object and then apply Gaussian blur. But here's a better way to work. The first thing you want to do is set this fill value right here to 0%, which will make the letters invisible. And what that allows us to do is make the letters invisible, but keep any layer effects that we might apply. Specifically, in our case, a drop shadow. So drop down to the FX icon at the bottom of the panel and choose the drop shadow command. And then make sure that your color is set to black and raise the opacity value to 100%. And then you can tab past the angle value, because it doesn't matter, all the way down here to the distance value, which you want to change to 0 pixels. Leave the spread set to 0, and then set the size to anything you want. For this image, I'm going to raise it to 125 pixels. Now notice that we can see the drop shadow, but the invisible letters are knocking out holes. If you don't want that, which we don't, then you can turn off this checkbox, Layer Knocks Out Drop Shadow. And incidentally, the drop shadow is unique of all the layer effects in offering this checkbox, which is why a drop shadow is so useful for creating blurry text. So notice as soon as you turn that checkbox off, we have our blurry letters. And you can change the blurriness of those letters using this size value. But as I say, I'm going to stick with 125 pixels and click OK. All right, now we want to firm up the edges of our letters. And the way you do that is to create a new layer of white behind the letters by clicking on the background right there, and then going up to the layer menu, choosing new fill layer, and choosing solid color. I'll go ahead and name this layer white, and then I'll click OK. And then finally, inside the color picker, I'll drag this little circle to the upper left corner of the color field, which of course gets us white, and then click OK once again. Now we need to firm up the edges using a levels adjustment layer. So click on the text layer to make it active, then return to the layer menu, choose new adjustment layer, and choose levels. And I'm going to go ahead and call this layer edges because we're using the layer to firm up the edges of our text. And now I'm going to increase the black point value by clicking inside of it and pressing Shift up arrow several times. And in all, I'm going to take this value up to 100, which as you can see bolsters the letters. And now we want to apply a similar change in the other direction to the white point value. So I'm going to take the default value of 255 and subtract 100 to get 155, like so. Now, of course, you can go your own way, and these values do not have to be symmetrical, but oftentimes a little bit of symmetry works. All right, now I'll hide the properties panel. Now, the next step is to drop out the white, which means that we have to put all three of these layers in a group by selecting the edges layer and then shift-clicking on the white layer. Then go up to the Layers panel flyout menu. In this movie, I'll show you the two different ways to search fonts. That is by entering a font name into the font field up here in the control panel inside InDesign CC. This is specifically applicable to CC, by the way. Things work differently in CS6. So first thing I'm going to do is double-click someplace inside this first paragraph with my black arrow tool, that is the selection tool. And that'll switch me to the type tool, and it will also position my blinking insertion marker. And now I'm going to select this entire paragraph by clicking inside of it 4 times sequentially. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and I end up selecting the whole thing, as you can see. And now I can see the font field up here in the control panel. So I'll go ahead and click in it to make it active. And let's say I want to switch to Adobe Caslon. Then I would just type in Caslon, let's say. And that'll show me every single Caslon that's available to me. Problem is, if I press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac in order to immediately accept that font, then I end up getting the bold style. And that's because bold appears first in alphabetical order. So even though it's arranged differently here inside the Type Style pop-up menu, it appears first when you're doing a search. If you don't want things to work that way, then you can click on this little known option right here, this little magnifying glass, click on it, and notice that you can search by the first word only instead. So let's say I switch to that setting, and I go ahead and switch to the regular style as well, like so. So in other words, I'm manually changing the type style there. And now I'll click on the font name, and this time I'll dial in Minion, like so. And that'll automatically select Minion Pro, as you can see here. And notice I'm not seeing the long list of styles this time around. And if I press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac, there's a good chance it might switch back to bold. You never know because it's first in alphabetical order as well. But there's also a good chance it might switch to regular in the future. So let's see what happens if I manually switch to regular here inside the Type Style pop-up menu. And now I go ahead and dial in Caslon. Well, I can't just type in Caslon this time because it does not appear as the first word in the font name. Instead, what I need to do is type in Adobe like so. And it's going for Adobe Caslon Pro because that's the first font in alphabetical order that begins with the word Adobe, at least installed on my system, at which point I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on a Mac, and this time I get the regular style, which is much more to my liking. And now, just so I don't have this orphan muss down here at the end of the paragraph, I'll press Control-Shift or Command-Shift greater than sign, that is Control-Shift or Command-Shift period, to make that text larger. Now, another way that takes care of problems, notice this, if I switch back to search entire font name, which can be more useful at times, and I click in front of the font name, and then I start typing something like Minion, notice that it just adds it right there at the beginning. Now, I'm willing to bet that's a bug that'll get fixed sometime soon, but if I escape out and I switch back to search first word only, And now I click in front of the font name and type in Minion. It goes ahead and intelligently switches to that font instead of preserving the previous font name and appending the new one onto it. That said, though, you may want to work with the default setting more often than not. And the reason is because that allows you to find all of the fonts that have a specific style. For example, let's say I want to find all fonts that have a black style. If I type in the word black for the font name, I'm going to get Black Oak Standard, at least on this machine. And that's not what I'm looking for. But that's the only font that starts with black. So I'll go ahead and press the escape key, and then I'll click on the magnifying glass again and switch to search entire font name. And now if I enter black, not for the style, but for the font, if I type in the word black here, I can see every font on my system that includes a black or a black italic or a black condensed style on this machine. So there are times that you're going to want to stick with the default setting, search entire font name, and there are times where you might want to switch to search first word only, which takes you back to the way things used to work in InDesign CS6 and earlier. But the most important thing is that you know that this option exists. And that's how you change the method by which you enter specific font names into the control panel font field here inside InDesign CC. Hey gang, this is Deke McClelland. Welcome to Deke's Techniques. This week I come to you in this pale beige t-shirt, which I might add looks terrible on me, for the simple reason that I don't want to compete with today's project, this colorful pattern of flowering vectors that we're about to create entirely from scratch based on a single circle inside of Adobe Illustrator. See, thanks to my t-shirt, I've been rendered invisible. All right, here's the final flower effect, just so you can see it on screen. We're going to be creating it from scratch here inside Adobe Illustrator. So go up to the File menu and choose the New command, or you can press Control-N or Command-N on the Mac. We want to create an RGB document, so go ahead and change the profile to Basic RGB right there. And notice that my units are set to points. I'm going to dial in a width value of 13 IN, that is 13 inches, and then as soon as I press the Tab key, notice that Illustrator automatically converts from inches to points. And then I'll dial in a height value of 9 inches. And next I'm going to set my bleed value to 0.25 inches, which is the same as soon as I press the Tab key as 18 points, as you can see, all the way around. Make sure down here in the advanced area, if you go ahead and twirl that open, that the color mode is set to RGB and that Align New Objects to Pixel Grid is turned off. Then click OK in order to create the new document. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in by pressing Control+ a couple of times here. Now, the only drawing we're going to do is to create a circle. So go ahead and select the ellipse tool from the Shape Tool flyout menu, and then click anywhere inside the document. Go ahead and turn on the link right there and change the width value to 30 points. That'll change the height value to 30 points as well. And then click OK. So we've got this little circle sitting here. We might as well get rid of the stroke by changing the stroke, the second swatch up here in the control panel, to none. And then just so we can see this circle, go ahead and give it any random fill. I'm going to select RGB blue. Now we're going to need 2 copies of this circle to pull off the effect. Now I want to go ahead and center the circle inside the document, and you can do that by clicking on this Align icon up here in the control panel and setting it to Align to Artboard. And then go ahead and click Horizontal Align Center and Vertical Align Center in order to center that circle. Now, all day we're going to need 2 copies of this circle, so go ahead and make a copy of it by going to the File menu and choosing the Copy command, or you can press Control-C or Command-C on the Mac. Now notice here inside the Layers panel that I have this tiny unnamed layer. I'm going to change its size by clicking on the flyout menu icon in the upper right corner of the panel and choosing Panel Options. And then I'll select Other and change it to 70 pixels and click OK. And now I'll rename the layer Circles because that's all it's going to contain. All right, now we want to go ahead and fill this tiny circle with a gradient. And just so we can see it better, I'm going to zoom in on it. And I'll go up to the Window menu and choose the Gradient command to bring up the Gradient panel. You want to expand the panel to its maximum size by clicking on this double arrow icon a couple of times, like so. And then click on the gradient to apply it. Now that's not the gradient I'm looking for. I want different colors. So I'll go ahead and click on this first color stop, the white one. And then up here in the color panel, which you can get to by choosing color from the Window menu if you like, I'm going to go ahead and define my color using the HSB sliders. So I'll choose HSB from the color panel flyout menu, and I'll change the hue value to 270 degrees, which is violet, and I'll take the saturation value up to 100%, and I'll set the brightness value to 30%, like so. Now I'd like to work from this color for this color stop as well, so I'm going to Alt or Option drag it over just a little bit here. And I'm going to take this black slider, which is totally black. You can see it's just 100% K. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it by dragging it downward, and then I'll drag this purple color stop over a little bit. Notice I'm looking at my RGB values. That's not what I want. So I'll go ahead and switch back over to HSB. And the reason that we're seeing different values than we entered up here is because Illustrator has to find the nearest RGB equivalent. In any case, I'm going to change that hue value to 265 degrees this time, and I'm going to take the brightness value up to 100%, like so. Now, we don't want a linear gradient, we want a radial gradient, so I'll go ahead and change the type to radial. All right, now I'm going to press Control-0 or Command-0 on a Mac to fit the artboard on screen. And we're going to apply a dynamic effect, but I want to apply it strictly to the fill. So I need to bring up my Appearance panel by going up to the Window menu and choosing the Appearance command. And then you want to click on the fill to make it active here inside the Appearance panel, and then go up to the Effect menu, choose Distort and Transform, and choose the Transform command in order to bring up this big dialog box right here. And now I'm going to change the horizontal value to 117%, and I'm going to change the vertical scale value to 117% as well. So they're both the same value, as you can see. And then I'll turn on the preview checkbox so I can see what I'm doing. Notice that makes that circle just a little bit bigger. We want to create a bunch of copies of this circle, so click in the copies value. And just go ahead and take it up to 24 copies and press the Tab key, and you can see that you'll have 24 copies of that circular fill, at which point you can click OK in order to apply that effect. Now, we don't have enough definition to these various fills. They're overlapping each other too much, so what I need to do is take this purple, this dark purple, and drag it over here inside the gradient panel to a location. The exact location value I'm looking for is 75%. Like so. All right, now I want to create even more definition around these circles. And notice, by the way, if you twirl open the fill, here inside the Appearance panel, you can see that transform effect. But we want to add another effect in the form of an outer glow. So again, make sure that fill's active, then go up to the Effect menu, choose Stylize, and choose Outer Glow. Now I want a different color, so I'll go ahead and click on this color stop. And I'm going to dial in the hue value of 15 degrees. These are just some values I came up with. And I'm going to change the saturation to 100%, and I'll take the brightness value up to 50%. Obviously, you can go your own way, but this is a nice complementary color, as you're about to see. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And now I'll turn on our preview checkbox so that we can see really nothing is happening at this point. I'll go ahead and crank the opacity value up to 100%, and I'm going to take the blur value down to 0.3 points, like so. And then I'm going to change the mode from normal to multiply, and click OK. Now, we're not seeing anything happen on screen. This is a little bit puzzling because the outer glow has gotten applied after the transform effect. We want to apply it first, so I'll go ahead and drag it up like so. So notice the difference. This is what things look like when the outer glow is below transform. This is what things look like when you drag outer glow above transform. It looks terrible, however, and that's because Illustrator is rasterizing the glow at 72 pixels per inch, which is not what we want. So go up to the Effect menu and choose this command right there, Document Raster Effect Settings. And the resolution we're looking for is higher than 300 ppi. So you want to just choose the other command and dial in a value of 1200 ppi. And then click OK, and now we get a much better looking effect. All right, now we need to bloat the effect a little bit, but we don't want to bloat the fill. Instead, we want to affect the entire path. So go ahead and click on Path here inside the Appearance panel. And then go up to the Effect menu once again, choose Distort and Transform, and choose Pucker and Bloat. And at this point, you probably want to turn on the Preview checkbox so you can see what you're doing. And then select this value right here and press Shift Up arrow a total of 3 times in order to bloat the shape as we're seeing right there, and click OK. All right, now at this point, you may recall the petals of the flower kind of move around, and that means that we need to apply a rotation, and that means we need to rotate our effect. So I'll go ahead and switch over to my illustration in progress here, And I'm going to click on the word transform. That's assigned here inside the appearance panel to the fill. Go ahead and click on it. And I decided that I wanted to rotate these various petals a total of 360 degrees, which describes a circle, divided by 32. That way we're going to get 32 petals all the way around. And then I'll press the tab key, and that gives me an angle value. When Illustrator does the math for me, it gives me an angle of 11.25 degrees, at which point I'll turn on the preview checkbox, and I get this effect here. And now I'll click OK. So far we have a kind of nautilus shell effect. That's not exactly what I want, which is why I need to transform the effect a little more by clicking on Pucker and Bloat up toward the top of the appearance panel, and then I'll go up to the effect menu, choose Distort and Transform, and choose the Transform command once again. And this time I want twice the rotate value I applied before. So last time I applied 11.25 degrees. I just happen to remember that. And if I type *2 after that and press the tab key, then Illustrator does the math once again, and we have a rotate value of 22.5 degrees. Turn on the preview checkbox. That doesn't really look all that better, which is why you need to click in the copies value and press the up arrow key in order to increase the copies to 1. And then go ahead and click OK. Now, unfortunately, Transform has landed at the bottom of the stack. That's not where we want it. So just go ahead and drag it all the way to the top of the stack. This one that's down here, not the indented one, but this one. Drag it all the way to the top of the stack, and we end up with this effect here, which frankly surprises me. This is not the effect I'm looking for, and that's because I forgot a step. So I'm just going to zoom in a couple of clicks here. And then we need to add more points to this circle. That's the problem. And the reason is that because of Pucker and Bloat, we get one bloat per each one of these segments. So what I'm going to do, just so we can keep track, I'm going to turn off this top transform in the appearance panel, and then I'll go up to the object menu, choose path, and choose add anchor points. And that way you're going to double the number of anchor points in the circle, which is also going to double the number of petals that are created by the Pucker and Bloat effect. And so I'll go ahead and choose that command, and notice now we have lots more petals to work with. And now if I turn that transform effect back on, we get this effect right here. And then finally, I just want to reorient my petals a little bit. So I'm going to apply one more helping of transform by going up to the effect menu, choosing Distort and Transform, and choosing Transform once again. Illustrator is going to ask me, do I really want to apply a new effect? And the answer is yes. So go ahead and click on the Apply New Effect button. And I'm going to dial in that same angle value from before, 11.25 degrees, and that's it. And notice, if I now turn on the preview checkbox, that we rotate the entire effect like so that these petals here are straight up and down. And then go ahead and click OK in order to apply that effect. All right, now at this point, you can stick with just the one color if you like, or you can add more colors. And if you want to add more colors, here's what you do. Go ahead and click on that existing fill. Your path should still be selected, by the way. Click on that fill, and then click on the little page icon down here at the bottom of the appearance panel in order to create a copy of it. And now I'll dial in new colors for my gradient by clicking on the first gradient stop here inside the gradient panel. And I will change the hue value this time around to 240 degrees and press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac to accept that change. So a saturation of 100% and a brightness of 30% are just fine. Then select the last color stop, the lighter purple. Change its hue value to 225 degrees this time, and leave both the saturation and brightness values set to 100%. And now we want to see some of that purple fill in the background. So go ahead and twirl open this blue fill here in the appearance panel and click on its transform effect. And then let's go ahead and take the number of copies down. So first turn on the preview checkbox, and then click inside that copies value and press the down arrow key in order to reduce the value ultimately to 16 copies like so. And you can see the effect update dynamically, which is a wonderful thing, of course. Now I'll click OK to accept that effect. And I'm going to go ahead and select this blue fill, the one I just applied, and I'm going to create 2 copies of it like so. Turn off the top copy. We'll come back to it in just a moment. Select this second copy right there, this guy, and let's change its color to orange by clicking on the first gradient stop here inside the gradient panel. And I'll dial in hue value of 15 degrees for this dark color. And I'll take the brightness value up to 75%. And we get this really interesting effect right here, which is not really what I want, but it's pretty cool. So I'll go ahead and select the second color stop there, and I'll change its hue value to 40 degrees, and then I'll leave the saturation and brightness values set to 100% apiece. We want to reveal some of the blue in the background, so go ahead and twirl that fill open, click on its transform effect, turn on the preview checkbox, click inside the copies value, and press the down arrow key until you get the desired effect, which for me happens at 12 copies. Of course, you can go your own way. By the way, you can go with a different color scheme entirely, different values inside the transform effect dialog box. It's totally up to you. I'll go ahead and click OK in order to accept that new change. And now I'll turn on the top blue fill. It's covering up the orange fill, so I'll go ahead and twirl it open, click on its transform, turn on the preview checkbox, and click inside the copies value and press the down arrow key until I begin to see the yellow fill in the background. And I'll ultimately take that copies value down to 8, as we're seeing right here. And then I'll click the OK button in order to accept that change. All right, that takes care of all the petals that are associated with the flower, but now we need to create this little button here inside of the center. And I'll do that by switching back, of course, to my illustration in progress. And then I'll go up to the edit menu and choose paste in front in order to paste that circle that we copied earlier. And now I'm going to zoom in on that circle by pressing Control plus or Command plus on the Mac several times. And I'm going to dial in a variation on that orange gradient by clicking first on this gradient bar here inside the gradient panel. And then I'll select this first color stop right there. And I'm going to dial in a hue value of 15 degrees. And then I'll take the brightness value up to 75%. Now I'll select this final color stop right there, and I'll change the hue value to 40 degrees, so same value as we used before. And I'll leave both the saturation and brightness values set to 100%. But I want to create a duplicate of this color stop, so I'll go ahead and Alt or Option drag it over to the far left side of the ramp here inside the gradient panel. Now I need to relocate the gradient inside of the circle, and to do that, you need to select the gradient tool. And now I'm going to go ahead and move this guy over like so. So notice what I'm doing is I'm positioning my cursor slightly outside of that square, just to the right of it. And now I'll go ahead and drag it down. And I'm pressing the Shift key to constrain the angle of that gradient to the nearest multiple of 45 degrees. And now I'm going to drag the center point up like so to right about here. Should work out pretty well for me. And now I'll go ahead and drag this guy, I'm dragging the square, down and to the left, while once again pressing the Shift key to achieve this effect here. And you know, I think I want to brighten up this color right here, the color that's at the start of the gradient. So I'm going to go ahead and select this first color stop in the gradient panel. And then up here in the color panel, I'm going to change the hue value to 50 degrees, like so. And then press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac to accept that change. All right, now we want to take this fill and duplicate it a couple of times. So I'll go ahead and select the fill inside the Appearance panel. And then you want to drop down to the little page icon at the bottom of the Appearance panel and click on it to make a duplicate of the fill. Then go up to the Effect menu, choose Distort and Transform, and choose our friend, the Transform command. And I want you to dial in scale values of 70% apiece. So for both the horizontal and vertical scale, are set to 70%, then turn on the preview checkbox and you'll see a smaller version of that fill like so, then click OK. And now we want to create another copy of this guy by selecting it and then clicking on the little page icon once again, and that way you'll copy not only the fill but the transform effect as well. Click on the word transform to bring up the transform effect dialog box and change both the horizontal and vertical values to 40%. Turn on the preview checkbox and you'll see this effect right here, at which point you can click OK in order to accept that change. All right, now press Control-Shift-A or Command-Shift-A on a Mac to deselect your artwork. And I'll go ahead and zoom out by pressing Control-0 or Command-0 on a Mac. And that, my friends, is how you create a flowering vector effect using nothing more than 2 circles here inside Illustrator. Now, if you're a member of the lynda.com online training library, I have a follow-up movie in which I show you how to take our pattern of flowering vectors, and we're going to stroke the petals to create this lattice effect. If you're waiting for next week's free movie, we're going to take those flowering petals and turn them into origami. Deeks techniques each and every week. Keep watching. In this movie, we're going to take that flowering vector effect from the previous movie, and we're going to turn them into these stroked petals. And you can see that we end up with this kind of lattice work where all of the white strokes overlap all of the black strokes all the way to the very center of the illustration. So let me show you how it works. I'm going to start things off by switching over to the document I created in that previous movie. And I'll go ahead and click on this first circle right there and press the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac to get rid of it. Now I'll go ahead and select the remaining circle by clicking on it. And then I'll go ahead and switch over to the Appearance panel, which you can also get by going up to the Window menu and choosing the Appearance command. And we want to get rid of most of these fills. So go ahead and click on the top one, shift-click on the second to bottom one right there, and then click on the little trash icon in the bottom right corner of the Appearance panel to delete those fills. And so in the end, if you're working along with me, you should just have the one purple fill. Now go ahead and twirl that fill open and grab both the outer glow and transform effects. So click on outer glow, shift click on transform, and then click on the trash icon to get rid of both of those. All right, now you want to go ahead and zoom in on your illustration. We're not going to have a fill for this effect. We're using strokes instead. So I'll go ahead and click on it, click on the trash can once again to get rid of it. Then go ahead and select the stroke and enter 1.1 for the line weight value, and you want to change the stroke color to black. Now you can see that we have a little bit of a problem at this point. We can see the strokes overlap each other. That's not what I want. So I'll go up to the Object menu and choose Expand Appearance. That way we end up with two separate paths. They're both grouped together at this point, as you can see by the word Group on the far left side of the control panel. But we can resolve that by going to the Window menu and choosing the Pathfinder command to bring up the Pathfinder panel. Then just go ahead and click on Unite in order to combine those two group paths together, and you'll end up with one independent path as indicated by the word Path on the far left side of the control panel. All right, now I'll go ahead and hide the Pathfinder panel, and I'll click on the word Stroke in the Appearance panel. And I'll go ahead and change the corners to round joins in order to get rid of those miters. And then I'll go ahead and click on Stroke again in order to hide that subpanel. All right, now what you want to do, because we're going to need this path again, go up to the Edit menu and just choose a Copy command or press Control-C or Command-C on the Mac. And as I say, we'll be coming back to this shape in just a moment. All right, let's now turn it into something fairly dazzling here. I'm going to press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac in order to zoom out. And then with the stroke selected here inside the Appearance panel, go up to the Effect menu, choose Distort and Transform, and choose the Transform command. Now, you may recall from the previous movie that we've been rotating this shape 11.25 degrees. It just happens to work out because, after all, there's 32 little bumps here, and 360 degrees makes up a circle, so you take 360, enter /32, and then press the Tab key, and you can see we get 11.25 degrees. And that slash indicates division, by the way. Next, we want to increase the scale values, both of them to 120%. That happens to work for this effect. And then turn on the Preview checkbox so you can see the shape grow larger and rotate. You also want to make sure that Scale, Strokes, and Effects, this checkbox right there, is turned on. It's off by default, so go ahead and turn it on. And then click on the Copies value and press Shift-up arrow twice in order to increase the Copies value to 20. And then click OK. And that's going to fill, by the way, your entire artwork all the way out beyond the bleed. All right, I'm going to zoom back in. Now we want to add a white stroke inside of the black stroke. So what you want to do, twirl open the stroke right there, the black stroke, and make sure Transform is assigned to the stroke and not the entire path, which it is in my case. Then, with stroke still selected, go ahead and drop down to the little page icon and click on it. And that'll make a copy of the stroke and its transform effect. Now, change the stroke, the top stroke, to white, and change its line weight right there to 0.5 points in order to produce this effect here. All right, that's pretty fun, but we're not done yet. I decided at this point I wanted sort of little sub-petals inside each of the larger petals, as you can see in the final version of the artwork, these little guys right there. And to pull that off, I brought back that original path by going up to the Edit menu and choosing Paste in Front. And then I went ahead and rotated a copy of the path by double-clicking on the Rotate tool. And then you want to enter 11.25 degrees once again. Turn on the Preview checkbox, just make sure things are rotating properly into place, and click on the Copy button in order to create a copy of that path. All right, I'm going to zoom in just a little more. I want these subpetals to come out just a little further, but I don't want the anchor points to move. I just want to scale, as it turns out, the segments, the curving segments. So to select the segments and deselect the anchor points, you go up to the Select menu, choose Object, and then choose Direction Handles, which is another one of Illustrator's terms for the control handles. And you can see that now we have a ton of control handles selected. None of the anchor points, however, are any longer selected, at which point you want to double-click on a Scale tool, and this time turn on the Preview checkbox, click inside the uniform value, which is 100% for me, and then press the up arrow key in order to nudge those segments out, as you see here. I ended up arriving at a value of 104%, at which point I'll click on the OK button in order to apply that change. Now I'll press the V key to switch back to the black arrow tool up here at the top of the toolbox and shift-click on that original path outline. We want the original to cut the new path outline. The original's in back. So what you need to do is bring back the Pathfinder panel, which you can get by choosing Pathfinder from the window menu, and then you want to go to this last icon, minus back, and click on it, and that will cut away the original path like so. All right, now I'm going to zoom out so I can see the entire illustration, and notice that I've got a group. I don't want a group, by the way. Instead, I want a compound path. That's the best way to work, and all you need to do to achieve that is go up to the Object menu, choose Compound Path, and choose Make. You're going to end up with a simpler object, and you're going to be able to see your strokes and effects in the Appearance panel. Now, go ahead and click on Compound Path in the Appearance panel to make it active. Then go up to the Effect menu and choose this second Transform command up here at the top of the menu, and that will bring back your previous settings, which is exactly what we want. So go ahead and turn on the Preview checkbox, and you can see that we've got a ton of these additional shapes. We don't need 20 copies. We only need 19. So I'll go ahead and reduce that value and click OK. And of course, we want these guys to be in back. So I'll right-click inside the document window, choose Arrange, and choose Send to Back. Now, for some reason, things aren't exactly lining up right here. And to fix that problem, I'm just going to reduce the line weight value slightly to 0.9 points, like so. And now we no longer get any of those lumps. We need white strokes in front, so go ahead and press Control-C or Command-C on the Mac in order to copy this path. Press Control-Shift-A or Command-Shift-A on the Mac to deselect your artwork, and press Control-F or Command-F on the Mac to paste that path that you just copied in front of everything. And now what we're going to do is change the stroke here in the Appearance panel. Change it to white for starters, and then take the line weight down to 0.4. And that's going to end up looking perfect, as you can see here. And now I'll press Control-Shift-A or Command-Shift-A on the Mac to once again deselect my artwork. All right, now we need to once again gain access to that very first path outline, which is no longer in the clipboard because I copied that other path. So what I have to do is click right about here. Notice on the top of one of these lumps, not over here, because you'll select these guys, which is not what we want. We want this path right there. So go ahead and grab it. And actually, let me show you something here. Sometimes you may find that your artwork ends up getting a little bit tilted, and that can happen for any number of reasons. But if you ever want to check, and this artwork is just slightly crooked, if you ever want to check on things, then you can grab the Line Segment tool and go up to the View menu and turn on Smart Guides if they're not already on. And then drag from this point all the way over to this one. And notice that even though I'm seeing in heads-up display 0 degrees, I do have a slightly crooked line. And to get a sense for how crooked that line is, I'll just press the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac to get rid of it. And I'll click with the Line tool to bring up the Line Segment Tool Options dialog box. And you can see that the line had an angle of 359.67 degrees. Well, what in the world does that mean? Here's what you do. Take 360, enter that before it, minus. So 360 minus whatever value is there. Press the Tab key and you'll see, oh, it's 0.33 degrees off. All right, so I'll cancel out of there. Then I'll go ahead and select my artwork by pressing Control-A or Command-A on the Mac. And I'll double-click on a Rotate tool, and I'll enter that value, 0.33 degrees, and press the Tab key. And then I'll click OK. And to confirm that everything worked the way it should, go ahead and drag another line with the Line tool, the Line Segment tool. Go ahead and press the backspace key to delete it. Click in order to bring up the Line Segment Tool Options dialog box. Notice the angle is now 0 degrees, so everything's the way it should be. Meanwhile, what I really want to accomplish here is to grab this shape and make a copy of it. So I'll get my black arrow tool, which you can get by pressing the V key. And then I'll click here in order to select that shape, and I'll press Control C or Command C on the Mac to copy it. And then I'm going to press Control B or Command B on the Mac to paste it in back. Now, I don't want these transform effects here inside the appearance panel, so I'll click on this one, then click on a trash icon to get rid of it. Select this guy, click on a trash icon to get rid of it. Select the black stroke and raise it to 3 points, like so. So we have a big, thick stroke. And then select the white stroke and take it up to 2 points, and you'll end up with this effect here. Now, the problem is this shape is too far to the back, and the easiest way to fix this is to switch over to the Layers panel and twirl open the circles layer so you can see where in the world this path outline is. Notice it's right there. It actually ought to be one level up, so I'll just go ahead and drag the path up in front of that path right there. So it's the second to top path. And we'll end up with this effect here. All right, now I want to be able to see the center of this path, so I'll go up to the window menu and choose the Attributes command, and that brings up the Attributes panel. You may have to click on the double arrow icon a couple of times in order to expand the panel so you can see this option right here, Show Center. Go ahead and click on it, and you'll get a little center point. Now you can hide the Attributes panel. Now what I want to do, I'll go ahead and switch over to the document that I've already drawn. I want to create this shape in the center here so that we have a kind of tiny stained glass effect. So I'll go ahead and switch over to my document in progress, and I will select the ellipse tool from the shape tool flyout menu, and I'll press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and click on that center point. And because you press the Alt or Option key, you not only bring up the ellipse dialog box, but you'll create the ellipse from the center outward. Now go ahead and lock down your values so that you're changing the width and height values together, and change either one of them to 15 points. So assuming they're both 15 points, and go ahead and click OK, and you've got yourself a little circle. We need another stroke, so I'll switch back to the Appearance panel, and I'll click on the Add New Stroke icon in the bottom left corner of the panel. Click on that bottom stroke, change it to black, and then raise its line weight to 3 points, like so, so that it matches the other path, the one right next to it. And now you want to go up to the Effect menu, choose Distort and Transform, and then choose Pucker and Bloat, and turn on the Preview checkbox, and then crank this value down into the pucker territory. And ultimately, we want to take this value down to negative 100%. And you see, I've got a big problem here. I'll click OK. The problem is that I accidentally applied the effect to the black stroke and not to the entire path. It's easy to solve, though. All you need to do is drag Pucker and Bloat, go ahead and select it, and then drag it up to above the strokes. Now notice that I have just 4 stems like a cross. I need more. And to get more, you need to add more segments. And you do that by going up to the Object menu, choosing Path, and choosing Add Anchor Points. And you'll see that doubles the number of anchor points, it doubles the number of segments, and it gives you more of these puckers. But we still need more than that. So go to the Object menu, choose Path, and then choose Add Anchor Points again in order to produce this effect here. Now you want to switch over to the Layers panel, and we want to drag this guy down one level like so. And then you want to press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and drag it down again. And because you're pressing the Alt or Option key, you'll create a copy of that path like so. So we've got a copy of this path behind the original scalloped path, which is what we want. However, we need to change an appearance attribute. So with this new lower path selected, go to the Appearance panel, grab that top stroke, the white one, and click on the trash icon to get rid of it. Then press the V key to switch back to the black arrow tool. Click in order to select the top of these 2 paths. This time we want to keep the white stroke, not the black one. So select the black stroke and then click on the trash icon to get rid of it. And you'll see this effect here. Next, I decided that there ought to be some color in the background. So I'll go ahead and press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac in order to zoom all the way out. Press Control-Shift-A or Command-Shift-A on the Mac in order to deselect the artwork. Then grab the rectangle tool this time around, and assuming that your smart guides are still on, just go ahead and surround the bleed like so, so that your rectangle snaps into place. We don't need the transform panel, so if it comes up, just go ahead and hide it. I'm going to send this guy back by right-clicking inside the document, choosing Arrange, and choosing Send to Back. We don't need a stroke, so I'll get rid of it. We do want a fill, and I want a gradient. So what you want to do is go to the window menu, choose gradient to bring up your gradient panel, and then click on a gradient to apply it. But make sure, by the way, that your fill is active. And I can see it is now active in the swatches panel. So I'll go ahead and click on my gradient in order to select it. Then I'll expand my gradient panel by clicking on a little double arrow icon. I'll change the type to radial, which is what I'm looking for, of course. All right, now I want to change the very first color stop by double-clicking on it, and I'll switch to my HSB values. And I'm going to leave the hue value set to 0, but I want to take the saturation value up to 25% so that we have just a little bit of red. Then I'll go ahead and double-click on this final color stop, choose HSB once again. 0 is a great hue value. I want a saturation value of 100%, and I want a brightness value of 25%. And then I want a lot of red right in the middle, so I'll click to create a new color stop. It needs to be right at 50%. So I'll go ahead and change the location value to 50, and then I'll double click on this new color stop, switch over to HSB once again, and I'll take the saturation and brightness values up to 100%. The hue value remains 0, as you can see there. All right, now I'll press Control-Shift-A or Command-Shift-A on the Mac to deselect my artwork. And I'll press the F key a couple of times to switch to the full screen mode, and I will zoom on in, at which point we can see the stroked petals represented as a kind of lattice work, where every white stroke is continuous, and the white strokes are outlined by black strokes here inside Illustrator. Hey gang, this is Deke McClelland. Welcome to Deke's Techniques. Now remember last week when I showed you how to create this pattern of flowering vectors in Adobe Illustrator? Well, this week we're going to turn them into flowering origami. And we're going to do so using a handful of dynamic effects under the effects menu. And let me assure you, if you're an Illustrator enthusiast, you're going to love this one. You could stop at any frame in the movie and have a great looking effect. Here, let me show you exactly how it works. All right, here's the final flowering origami effect, just so you have a chance to see it on screen. I'm going to start inside that file that we created last week. And armed with my black arrow tool, which is selected here at the top of the toolbox, I'll go ahead and click anywhere inside the colorful petals in order to select that original circle. Then you want to go up to the window menu and choose the Appearance command to bring up the Appearance panel. Then click on the word Path at the top of the panel. Now, the primary command that we're going to be using to create the origami effect is located under the effect menu. You go down to Distort and Transform, and it's this command right there, Zigzag. Now, the first thing you want to do is turn on the preview checkbox so you can get a sense for what's going on. I went ahead and left absolute and corner selected, these two options right here, but I did modify the numeric values, and you can as well by clicking inside the size value and then pressing the down arrow key in order to reduce the size of the zigzag effect on the fly. And I ended up taking it down to 2 points. And then I tabbed down to the ridges per segment value and took it up to 5 in order to produce this effect right here. Then you want to click OK. Now you want to make sure pucker and bloat, this guy right here, that we applied last week, is on top of zigzag. If it's underneath zigzag like so, then you'll end up rounding off the segments. It's not necessarily a bad effect. In fact, it's pretty cool, but it's not the effect I'm looking for. So I'll go ahead and drag pucker and bloat back on top of zigzag. And then to modify the effect, you want to go ahead and click pucker and bloat to bring up the pucker and bloat dialog box. Again, turn on the preview checkbox. Then click inside that percentage value and press the down arrow key in order to reduce the value incrementally. And you can see that we get a very interesting effect here at 20%, in which basically all the segments are aligning with each other. That's not really what I want, though, so I kept taking that value down. I'll press the down arrow key a few more times. At about 12%, we start getting what appears to be an origami effect. At least it looks like one to me, because we've got the pieces of paper folded around themselves. But I took the value down even farther to 8% in the end. And you can go farther than that if you want to, of course, and you'll get all kinds of different effects as you go. Anyway, I'm going to take that up to 8%, as I say, and then I'll click OK in order to apply that change. All that remains is to modify that little button in the center of the flower. So I'll go ahead and click on it to select it, and you'll know that you have the right thing selected because you'll see just 4 anchor points around the circle instead of 8. And you'll also see a variety of gradients applied to the shape here inside the appearance panel. What you want to do is click on the last fill, which is the bottommost fill in the stack. It's the big one. And then twirl it open so that you can see what you're doing here. And to start things off, go up to the Effect menu and choose the second occurrence of zigzag, the one that says zigzag ... to bring up that same dialog box we saw before, and then turn on the preview checkbox, and you'll see that you convert the circle into a kind of star, at which point you can go ahead and click OK. Just go ahead and accept the last values we applied by clicking OK. Now, with that fill still selected, go up to the Effect menu, choose Distort and Transform, and choose the Transform command. And this time, I'm going to change both the horizontal and vertical scale values to 102%. And then we want the rotate value to be 22.5 degrees. And then you want to turn on the preview checkbox. And now, click in the copies value and press the up arrow key in order to increase the number of copies. And I eventually took this value up to 7. Purely a subjective determination, so you can totally go your own way. And now I'll click OK in order to apply that change. And then finally, I want some more definition around this fill. So I'll go up to the Effect menu, choose Stylize, and choose Outer Glow. I really want to kind of shadow, so I'll go ahead and click on the color swatch right there, and I'll change the hue value to 15 degrees. I'll take the saturation value up to 100%, and I'll take the brightness value down to 25%, like so, and then click OK. And now you want to darken things up by changing the mode from screen to multiply, increase the opacity to 100%, take the blur value down to 2, and turn on the preview checkbox, and you'll see a little bit of definition around that fill. Now click OK. All right, now imagine that we want to repeat all of these effects on these other fills. But first of all, I want the zigzag to be applied to the entire path. So I'll just go ahead and drag it up to directly below the path like so, and you can see now it's affecting the other fills. And then I'll click on Transform and shift-click on Outer Glow that are assigned to this bottom fill. I'll press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and drag those 2 items and drop them onto the middle fill like so. And that'll go ahead and duplicate Transform and Outer Glow onto that fill, at which point I'll close the bottom fill and open the top one. And I'll click on the second occurrence of Transform, because the way effects work inside the appearance panel is the earliest effect is on top and the later effect is underneath it. So it's the second transform we want to modify. Go ahead and click on it. And this time we'll take both the horizontal and vertical scale values up to 104%. Click on a preview checkbox and you can see that makes that fill a little bigger, at which point you can click OK. Then go ahead and grab this guy and shift click on this guy. So the second transform and outer glow, and Alt or Option drag them onto the top fill, which duplicates them once again, as you can see here inside the document window. Go ahead and twirl that second fill close, twirl the top one open, and click on the second occurrence of transform. Take both the horizontal and vertical scale values up to 107% this time, turn on a preview checkbox, and you end up with this effect here. After which point, just go ahead and click OK in order to accept that change. Now I'm going to go ahead and collapse that top fill. And let's say you're not exactly sure you're happy with the zigzag effect. Well, you can modify a dynamic effect anytime you like just by clicking on its name here inside the appearance panel. And now I'll turn on the preview checkbox so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to click in the size value and I'll press the up arrow key in order to take that value up like so. And in the end, I decided that a value of 4 worked out pretty nicely. Then I'll tab over to the ridges per segment value and press the up arrow key in order to take it up 1, and look at the tremendous difference that it makes. If I take it up to 7, I get this effect. 8 produces this effect. So you never know what you're going to get until you start trying it out. But in my case, I settled on 6 ridges per segment. So a size of 4, 6 ridges, click OK in order to accept that change. And then I'll press Control-Shift-A or Command-Shift-A on the Mac in order to deselect my artwork. And I'll go ahead and zoom out. I'll go ahead and press the F key a couple of times in order to switch to the full screen mode. And that, friends, is how you create a work of flowering origami using dynamic effects, specifically zigzag combined with pucker and bloat and transform here inside Illustrator. If you're a member of the lynda.com online training library, I have a follow-up movie in which I show you how to take our flowering origami effect, and we're going to paint it with a series of transitional gradients. So notice how the colors are continuously changing from one petal to the next. If you're waiting for next week's free movie, I'm going to show you how to get this very piece of artwork to print as well as the output in my hands. Because once you get this colorful and this continuous, the printing gets tough. Deeks Techniques each and every week. Keep watching. In this movie, we're going to take that origami artwork that we created in the previous movie, and as opposed to settling for just this trio of colors, the blues, the oranges, and the purples, we're going to apply a continuous fountain of colors over the course of the origami petals. So I'm going to start things off by zooming in on my artwork. And the first thing that I want to do is to create a kind of transition between this orange button at the center of the flower and these blue spikes that are emanating out from it. So I'll go ahead and click on one of those blue spikes to select that 8-pointed circle that's at the center of the artwork. And then what you want to do is go up to the window menu and choose the appearance command in order to switch over to the appearance panel. And you will see that we have a total of 4 gradients that we've applied in advance. Go ahead and click on the top fill and then click on a little page icon at the bottom of the appearance panel to create a copy of it. All right, now you want to click on that new fill that you just created to select it. And then you want to bring up the gradient panel by going up to the window menu and choosing the gradient command. And you may need to expand the panel as well by clicking on that little double arrow icon. Then select the first color stop, the one that appears at a location of 75%. Make sure your color panel is available at the top of the screen. If not, you can choose color from the window menu. And then go ahead and select HSB from the flyout menu so that we're working with the hue, saturation, and brightness slider triangles. Now, because we want to transition from orange, I'm going to change the hue value to 15 degrees, and I'll leave the saturation value at 100%, and then I'll take the brightness value up to 75% in order to produce this effect. Now I'll select the blue color stop, the one on the far right side of the gradient bar, and I'll change the hue value this time to 60 degrees, and I'll leave both the saturation and brightness value set to 100%. Now you can see that we are replacing all of the blues with this new yellow color scheme, which is not what I want, of course. And to remedy the situation, what you need to do is twirl open this fill, this top fill down here in the appearance panel, and click on the word transform. Notice it right here. To bring up the transform panel, turn on the preview checkbox, click in the copies value, and press the down arrow key to reveal some of those blues like so. And in the end, you want to take the copies value down to 2 and then click OK. All right, now let's go and twirl close this new fill. Click on it to select it and click on a little page icon at the bottom of the appearance panel to create a copy of it. Click on the second fill down this time around. Your gradient panel should still be up, at which point you want to select the first color stop and then dial in a few new values. We're going to start this time at a hue value of 40 degrees. The saturation and brightness values are fine at 100% and 75% respectively. Then go ahead and select the final yellow color stop. Change its hue value to 195 degrees, which is a shade of blue, and press the enter key or the return key to accept that change. Problem is we can't see what we just did because it's covered up by the fill on top of it. So twirl open this new fill, and you may need to scroll down a little bit to see what you're doing. Then click on its transform effect, turn on the preview checkbox, click inside the copies value, and press the up arrow key in order to create one copy like so. Now we're starting to get a pretty good transition, but we need one more bit of fill there. So I'll go ahead and twirl close this new fill, click on it, drop down to the page icon, click on it to make a copy, click on that third fill down this time around, select the first color stop, the orange one. This time we're going to dial in a hue value of 195 degrees where we left off the last time. A saturation value of 100% is fine, and a brightness value of 75%. I keep saying that even though it says 74.9, and that's because Illustrator's having to round off to the nearest RGB equivalent. Now I'll select this final color stop right there, and I will change the hue value this time around to 225 degrees, and I'll take the brightness value down to 75%. We can't see what we've done because once again it's covered up, so twirl open this new fill and find its transform right there, its transform effect. Click on it to bring up the transform effect dialog box, turn on the preview checkbox, click inside the copies value, press the up arrow key, and you will see that new copy that we just created. So the good news is we have this nice smooth transition from the yellows into the blues. The bad news is it's a very manual process. We had to create 3 new gradient fills in order to accommodate these colors. Well, that's not the only way to work. There is a shortcut that we're going to take advantage of next. So go ahead and click OK in order to accept that new value there. And now what we're going to do is switch over to the Layers panel for a moment. Zoom out by pressing Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac. And I'm actually going to zoom out even farther still. And what we're going to do is we're going to draw a new circle that covers up everything by selecting the ellipse tool from the shape tool flyout menu. And then you want to click right here, but actually you want to press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and click in order to bring up the ellipse dialog box. And the fact that you press the Alt or Option key means that you're going to create this circle from the center outward. Make sure the chain, the little link is on, and change either the width or height value to 1400 points. And click OK to create that massive circle that you see right there. Now, it shouldn't appear in front of that orange button at the center of things, so right-click on the circle, choose Arrange, and choose Send Backward. Not send it back, just send backward to send it back one step. Now, at this point, you may figure, well, gee whiz, this really does look like it's covering up everything. Well, what we're going to do here is press Control plus or Command plus on the Mac to zoom in, and then I'm going to click on this little zoom value in the lower left corner of the window and press the up arrow key a few times to increase the zoom ratio to 105%, which just happens to work well on this screen. Notice that the circle is still selected, at which point I'll go up to the control panel, click on opacity, and change the blend mode from normal to color in order to use this gradient to color the artwork in the background. And then I'll go ahead and hide the opacity panel for the moment. And I'll go ahead and zoom in a little farther. What the heck? And now what we need to do in order to precisely position the colors that we want to work with, you need to grab your gradient tool, at which point you will see this big gradient bar. Now, you don't need to modify the gradient annotator. You just need to change out the colors that are at work inside this gradient. And so the first thing we're going to do is grab this first gradient stop here inside the gradient panel because it's so far over to the right. We'll go ahead and move it back over. And I just happen to know from experience that I want the location value to start off at 6% because I want the colors to start right there. And the color that I'm looking for has a hue value of 240 degrees. So I'm going to actually dial in these values up here in the color panel because the color stop is selected. So I'll change the hue to 240 degrees. A saturation value of 100% is just fine. A brightness of 75% is fine as well. All right, now let's take this guy right here and press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and drag it over a little bit to about here, let's say, in order to create a copy of it. And then double click on that little slider triangle. And let's change the location value here inside this pop-up panel to 7% is what I'm looking for. I'll bring it back up so you can see. And I'm also going to take the opacity value down to 75%. And now I'm going to switch to the first color stop, this guy right there, double click on it and change the opacity value to 0% and press the tab key. And that way that my reasoning here, just so you understand what's going on, I'll go ahead and zoom in, is that at this point we want the gradient to be transparent because we've already established the colors that we like here at the center of our flower. But right over here, we need some enhanced opacity, so that's why I set it to 75%. And now we want to add some more color, so I'll go ahead and Alt or Option drag this color stop to right about there, let's say. Now I'll double click on it, and I'll change the location value to 9%. I'll go ahead and bring up my HSB values so that I can change the hue value to 180 degrees, and I'll go ahead and take the brightness value up to 100%. That's too much opacity. As you can see, we're doing some damage to the image in the background. So I'm going to reduce the opacity value to 50%. So you can change the opacity of every single color stop in a gradient independently inside of Illustrator. All right, now we want to add yet another color stop. So I'll just go ahead and let's say click right about there. Then I'll double click on that new stop, change the location value this time to 12%. And I'm going to bring up my HSB values, which I have to do every time inside this panel. So it's a little bit of a pain in the neck, but I'm going to change the hue value to 40 degrees this time. And I want a brightness value of 100%. So we want both saturation and brightness to be 100. And then I'm going to change, and this is going to seem weird, but I'm going to change the opacity value down to 0%. And what this does is it fades to the yellow as the gradient goes from 50% to 0% opaque. All right, now we've got a lot of colors in this gradient, so I'm just going to spacebar drag over to the side here, bring back up my gradient annotator, and I'm going to take the cyan guy right there and alt drag or option drag it to about this location here. Then I'll double click on that color stop, change the location value to 17%. The color is just fine as is, but I want to take the opacity value up to 100% in order to create this effect here. All right, now we want to add some blues. So I'll go ahead and alt drag or option drag that most recent color stop in order to create a copy of it. Double click on it in order to bring up this panel. And I want the location to be 20% this time around. I'll go ahead and switch over to HSB once again. The hue value should be 210 degrees this time, which is a shade of blue. And the opacity should be and will remain, by the way, 100% over the course of the rest of this gradient. All right, now press the Enter key or the Return key on a Mac to accept that change. Bring back up my gradient annotator by hovering over it. That's the way you get to these colors. Then Alt or Option drag this color stop over to right about here, but we can confirm where it needs to be by double clicking on it. And I want the location value to be 25% this time around, and obviously I spent a lot of time trying things out in order to figure out what the best values were. And now I'll switch to HSB once again, and I'll take the hue value this time to 225 degrees, so we're getting still more blue, and then I'll take the brightness value down to 50%. So 225, 150 for the HSB values. The opacity is still 100%. And now let's go ahead and alt drag or option drag a copy of this guy over to someplace in here. Double click on the color stop. And we want the location value this time to be 36%. Bring up the HSB values, change the hue value to 270 degrees, which is violet, and both the saturation and brightness should be 100% like so. We need to drag even farther over here, and I'll go ahead and bring back the gradient annotator. And this time, actually, I'm going to zoom out a little bit because this color needs to be pretty near the end of the gradient. It's going to be someplace around here. And so I'll go ahead and click to create another color stop. I'll double click on it, change its location this time to 70%. Bring up the HSB values. We want the hue value to be 0 this time around, which is red. And I'll take the saturation and brightness values up to 100% each. And then finally, you want to go ahead and select that very last color stop, double click on it. Currently, for me, it's blue, but it wants to be yellow. The location value should be 100%, so should the opacity value. Bring up the flyout menu, select HSB, change the hue value to 40 degrees, and then we'll take the brightness value up to 100%. So both saturation and brightness are 100%. Then press the Enter key or the Return key on a Mac to accept that change. And now I'll press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac in order to zoom out. And I'll go ahead and switch back to my black arrow tool, the so-called selection tool at the top of the toolbox. And with that circle still selected, I'm going to take the opacity value up here in the control panel down to 88%. Seems to work pretty well. And then I'll go ahead and zoom in, and I'll take my zoom ratio up to 105% down here in the bottom right corner of the window. All right, now at this point, it struck me that these regions of blue right here are starting to look pretty muddy. So what I decided to do was modify the gradients that are associated with the underlying object. And I'm going to get to it by going up to the Select menu and choosing Next Object Below. And that'll go ahead and select that 8-pointed circle that makes up the origami petals. And you can now see the various gradients represented here inside the appearance panel. The ones we're looking for are the fourth to top, so the fourth one down, and the sixth one down. Those are these regions of blue right here, and you can confirm that by turning them off. Notice if I turn these guys off, then the blues disappear to some extent. I'm going to go ahead and turn them back on here and make some modifications to them. So I'll select that top blue fill, which is this region right here. And then here inside the gradient panel, I'll go ahead and select the second color stop. The first one's fine. And I'll change the hue value to 210 degrees. And then I'll leave the saturation and brightness values set to 100% apiece. And that goes ahead and brightens up that central blue area quite a bit. Now select the sixth fill down, the one that represents this region of blue right there. And select the first color stop here in the gradient panel. And we want to adjust the brightness value. A hue value of 240 degrees is just fine. We want the saturation to be 100%, but we want the brightness value to be 75%. And notice that that brightens things up quite a bit. And now go ahead and select the final color stop in the gradient. And we're just going to take the hue value down slightly to 220 degrees. The saturation and brightness values want to remain at 100% apiece. And now you can press Control-Shift-A or Command-Shift-A on the Mac in order to deselect your artwork. And finally, I'll go ahead and press the F key a couple of times to switch to the full screen mode. And the result is a considerably more colorful flower with smooth transitions from one area of color to the next, thanks in large part to our ability to create a gradient that includes all sorts of degrees of translucency and opacity and set that gradient to the color blend mode here inside Illustrator. Hey gang, this is Deke McClelland. Welcome to Deke's Techniques. Now you may recall last week I showed you how to create that flowering origami artwork in Adobe Illustrator. Problem is getting it to print, and this is one possible output right here. And this is a really great printer, by the way, an Epson R3000, but you can see things darken up, and we've got this terrific amount of banding as well. Now, some folks might say, okay, we've got a calibration problem. I'm here to tell you that we've got a much more fundamental problem than that. We're dealing with different gamuts. Now, the R3000 is an 8-ink printer, so it's way more robust where colors are concerned than CMYK, but it's not RGB. It's just not necessarily going to match your screen. So I'm going to tell you, and you can take this with a grain of salt if you like, that we're better off modifying the artwork like so. And it's a pretty straightforward process. The trick is to do so inside of Photoshop instead of Illustrator, where you have a lot more control. Here, let me show you exactly how it works. All right, this is a fairly complex topic, at least conceptually. So I want to review how this image prints on screen. So for starters here, we're looking at that artwork that I created last week inside of Adobe Illustrator. Right now we're seeing it rasterized in Photoshop, but that doesn't matter where the colors are concerned because the colors are going to preview the same inside both programs. This next version is how the image prints uncorrected, either from Photoshop or Illustrator. And so you can see here that we have a much darker version of the artwork, not because the printer isn't calibrated properly, but rather because your typical screen is too bright where print previewing is concerned. We also have this amazing amount of banding between the blues and the purples, which is far too much, of course. And then finally, this is the best case scenario for printing this artwork, which is still a little bit of a compromise. You can see that our original artwork looked like this, and our best case print is going to look like this. However, it's obviously better than what we got from the uncorrected output. Now, another thing to note, I'll go ahead and show you the adjusted output. This is the way it looks when it's printed, but this is the way the artwork looks on screen. So it's significantly brighter on screen. Again, that's because unless you've done some serious calibration to it, your screen is too bright for evaluating output. So as a result, you may find that on a regular basis, your images darken up when you print them. And here's how to avoid that. So what I'm going to do here is I'll go up to the File menu and choose the Open command. And I'm working inside Photoshop, very important. Or you can press Control-O or Command-O on a Mac. and then find that original illustration, which I'm calling illustratorgradients.ai, and I'll go ahead and click open. So you can open a piece of Illustrator artwork inside Photoshop any old time you like. Notice that I've got thumbnail size set to fit page so that I have a big thumbnail. I'm cropping to the bleed box because there is a 1/4-inch bleed around this artwork. That way I get as much of the art as possible. And I went ahead and cranked the resolution value up beyond 300 pixels per inch. In my case to 420. That's a little arbitrary, but what it does is it ensures that I'm going to have really smooth results when I convert these vectors to pixels, which is what happens when you open an illustration in Photoshop. And so you could go even higher if you want to, and that way you could print the artwork really super big, or you could just stick with 420 pixels per inch, because the higher you go, the longer it's going to take to rasterize the art. The mode should be Adobe RGB. The bit depth is 8 bits per channel. That's fine. Then click OK. Now, it is going to take a few moments for Photoshop to do its thing and rasterize that artwork. But in 30 seconds to a minute, you should see the image open up on screen. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and zoom on in by changing the zoom value in the lower left corner of the window to 18%. That just happens to work well on my screen. We don't need this independent layer. So to save room on disk, you can go up to the layer menu and choose flatten image. All right, now the first step when you're trying to brighten a piece of artwork for print, and again, if you find that your output is darkening on a regular basis, here's what you do. Go up to the layer menu, choose new adjustment layer, and choose levels. And that'll bring up the new layer dialog box, at which point I'll call this layer brighten and click OK. And then notice this gamma value right here. It allows you to brighten or darken the midtones. You want to brighten them up by pressing Shift up arrow a couple of times with this value selected in order to increase the gamma value to 1.2. Or you might prefer to go to 1.3. So somewhere between 1.2 and 1.3 is going to get you a piece of artwork that looks brighter, that brightens up as you print it so that it'll look the way it normally looks on screen in print. So that's just a little trick that you can take advantage of. Now I'm going to go ahead, hide the properties panel. And what I want to do is also independently affect that area in which the banding was occurring. So I'll go ahead and switch over to that print comparison file. And I'll go ahead and turn on that uncorrected output layer. And I'm going to zoom on in so that we can take a look at what's going on. And notice where the banding is appearing. The banding's a little softer when we're this far zoomed in, so I'll zoom out just a little bit so that we can see it's pretty significant right there between the blues and the purples. And it happens in this region right here. So what I decided to do, because of the nature of this art, was count my way out from this central yellow portion of the flower. So I've gone ahead and created this numbers group here. So you can see here that we're ultimately looking at the 4th and 5th rows out. The 6th row is just fine. Don't need to worry about it. And the first 3 rows are okay as well. But we're seeing the banding at the tip of the 4th row and inside of the 5th row of spikes. So that's the region that we need to affect. And we're going to isolate that region using the original paths that we created inside of Illustrator. So I'll go ahead and switch over to Illustrator right now. Notice that my layers panel is up on screen. I'm going to go ahead and twirl open that layer, that circles layer, and I'll turn off the stuff I don't need, which means I'm turning off the top 2 paths. I need the bottom path. So I'll go ahead and click with the black arrow inside of the illustration window to select it. And then I'll go up to the edit menu and choose copy, or I can press Control-C or Command-C on the Mac, and then I'll return to the edit menu and choose paste in front, or press Control-F or Command-F on the Mac to create a copy of that path. Now I'll turn off the original to protect it so I don't ruin it. And now what you want to do with this new path still selected, go up to the window menu and choose the Appearance command to bring up the Appearance panel. Now, there's a ton of fills that are applied to this path currently, as well as a bunch of dynamic effects. What you want to do is keep this guy right there because that's the central orange region right there. And notice if I turn it off, you can see it goes away. If I turn it back on, it comes back. We don't need this blue area right here because it's just confusing. It only contains 4 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll need to add a 5th in just a moment. We don't need the purple, so go ahead and select the purple fill and click on the little trash icon to get rid of it. And then select this guy right there, the blue above the orange gradient, and shift click on the top fill, and then click on the trash icon to get rid of all those as well. So we just have the orange fill and the blue fill. Now what you want to do is twirl open both the orange and blue fills, and select the outer glows for both of those fills and click the trash icon to get rid of them. So you'll have to do it one at a time. I'll select this outer glow now and click the trash can icon, because if we leave them there, they're going to cause us problems. All right, now with the blue fill selected right there, click on its transform, turn on the preview checkbox, click in the copies value, and press the up arrow key to increase the copies value to 17 so that you're seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows around the orange portion of the flower, and click OK. All right, now what we want to do is expand what we're seeing here, these dynamic effects, so that we have static path outlines that we can use in Photoshop. And you do that by going up to the object menu and choosing Expand Appearance. And you'll end up with all these path outlines, which are grouped together as indicated by the word group over here on the far left side of the control panel. Well, we don't want those groups because that's going to cause us problems, and we've got tons of groups inside of groups. So what you have to do is go up to the object menu and choose the ungroup command as many times as it takes to make the word group go away. It's still there, so go to the object menu and choose ungroup again. It's still there, so go to the object menu and choose ungroup a third time, and then you'll see the word path, which indicates now we're down to just the static path outlines. Click off the paths to deselect them, and then click on one of these outermost paths to select it. And to make sure that you've selected all the blue paths, you go up here to the Select Similar Objects icon up here in the control panel. Click this down pointing arrowhead and choose Fill Color. And if that doesn't select all the other shapes, then go ahead and click on the icon as well. And now you select all those blue shapes. Now we want to combine them together. It looks like we've gotten the orange shapes too, but we have blue shapes behind the orange shapes. So with all these guys selected, go up to the Window menu and choose the Pathfinder command, which brings up the Pathfinder panel, and click on this first icon, Unite, to fuse all those paths together. Now you want to click on one of the orange paths. Any orange path will do. Go back to the Select Similar Objects icon, click on it to select all of those orange paths, and click on the Unite icon once again to fuse those paths together. Now you can hide the Pathfinder panel and go ahead and marquee what are now just two path outlines, and then go up to the Edit menu and choose the Copy command, or press Control-C or Command-C on the Mac. Now what you want to do is switch back to Photoshop, and I'm going to bring up that image in progress like so. When you paste these paths into Photoshop, you want them to be exactly centered. And what Photoshop does is it pastes the paths in the center of the image window. So we've got to make sure the artwork is centered in the image window by pressing Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac. That's all you got to do there. Then you want to go up to the Window menu and choose the Paths command to bring up the Paths panel. Drop down to the little page icon at the bottom of the panel and Alt or Option click on it to force the display of the new path dialog box. And I'll call these paths From AI, let's say, from Adobe Illustrator, and click OK. And then you want to go up to the Edit menu and choose the Paste command or press Control-V or Command-V on the Mac in order to bring up the Paste dialog box. By default, you'll probably see Smart Object selected. That's not what we want. In fact, only one of these options is going to do, and that's Path. So go ahead and select it and click OK. And we now have our path outlines like so. And now I'm going to zoom in a little bit here just to make sure that my path outlines are aligned to the artwork, which they are. That will happen as long as you first press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac to center your artwork before you paste. Now I'm going to select my black arrow tool, which Photoshop calls the path selection tool. I'll go ahead and deselect the paths by clicking off this path here inside the paths panel. So I'm clicking below it, and then I'll select it once again, and you can see that the paths are no longer selected. I need to select this interior path independently of the other one, so I'll click on it, and then you want to go up to the options bar, click on the path operations icon, and choose Subtract Front Shape. And now you'll see that it turns into a hole. This little thumbnail here inside the paths panel, which will appear bigger if you right-click and choose Large down here in an empty portion of the panel. And that way you can see this gray area on the outside, which is outside the paths, and this gray area on the inside of this path, which is outside the paths as well. So we have a kind of donut path at work. All right, now you can click off the path to hide it. And what we need to do is switch back to the Layers panel, and I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here. Now, part of the problem with these colors that are at work inside the gradients is they're too super saturated, which means they're ultimately unprintable. And if you want to get a sense for just how outside the print gamut they are, you can go up to the View menu and choose Gamut Warning. And everything that shows up as gray is not technically a printable color, which means that just about none of this graphic is really all that printable. Now, what we're really seeing is the default profile for commercial output, for CMYK output. So we'll be able to do better than this, but we still do need to take some of the wind out of these colors. And so I'm going to go up to the view menu, turn the gamut warning off. And what we're going to do is we're going to take down the vibrance a little bit by going up to the layer menu, choosing new adjustment layer and choosing vibrance. And I'll go ahead and call this guy down vibe because I'm going to reduce the vibrance, click OK. And then you want to take the vibrance value down to -20. Just to take the hottest colors down. So that's a great thing about the vibrance value. It always takes down the most vibrant colors or takes up the least vibrant colors. Whereas saturation is going to take down or up all the colors, which is not what we want. All right, so just take that vibrance value down to -20, and then we want to mask the effect inside of that 5th row of spikes. So switch back to the Paths panel, click on the path to select it, then return to the Layers panel, drop down to the Add Layer Mask icon at the bottom of the panel, and instead of clicking on it, which would give you a pixel-based layer mask, you want to press the Control key or the Command key on the Mac and click on it. And that way you get a vector mask. So you convert the paths to a vector mask, as you can see, indicated by this gray thumbnail. I want to affect all of the colors inside of this 5th row, including the colors inside of the yellow portion of the flower. So I'm going to click on this path, still armed with the black arrow tool, and I'll press the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac to get rid of it. And things are looking way too low saturation. But again, because the artwork is going to darken up, that's going to increase the ink density and therefore increase the saturation of the colors as well. Problem is, if I go ahead and switch back to the rectangular marquee tool, so that I'm hiding my path outline, you can see that my colors are getting brighter. So if I turn off that vibrance layer, that's the way the colors looked before. This is how they look now. We don't want the colors getting brighter, so I'll go ahead and change the blend mode from normal to color so that we're not affecting the luminance of the illustration at all. And now you can see we're making a very subtle change. This is what the illustration looks like without that vibrance layer. This is what it looks like with that layer. But it's going to make a big difference in print. Finally, we want to increase the brightness of everything outside the yellow portion of the flower. And the reason I'm doing this is based solely on experience. At this point, I went ahead and printed the illustration. It was still too dark, especially out here where the spikes transition from this kind of greenish blue to purple to red. So I went ahead and created another levels layer by going out to the layer menu, choosing new adjustment layer and choosing levels. And I'll go ahead and call this guy more bright, let's say. Click OK in order to switch to the properties panel. Click inside that gamma value, and I'm going to press Shift up arrow 1, 2, 3 times this time to increase the value to 1.3, which is dramatically increasing the brightness of the midtones, which is what we want. You don't want to touch your highlights and your shadows because, after all, they're going to survive pretty much the way you're seeing them on screen. Now I'm going to hide the properties panel. We want to affect just that area outside the yellow of the flower. So I'll switch back to the paths panel, select that path, that from AI path, switch back to the layers panel, drop down to the add layer mask icon, control click on it here on the PC. That's a command click on the Mac. And then go ahead and grab your black arrow tool again, scroll over a little bit. So I'll go ahead and select this guy instead, the outermost path, and I'll press the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac. And that way we're not affecting the area inside of the yellow portion of the flower. Notice if I turn the layer off, it's staying the same, but the area outside the yellow portion of the flower is brightening up with this layer turned on. And now I'll go ahead and press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac to zoom out. And I'll go ahead and zoom in a little bit to 18% here. And you can see that we have a much brighter piece of art. I'll go ahead and press the F key a couple of times in order to fill the screen with the artwork. And that, friends, is how we take the original artwork created in Adobe Illustrator, which, if uncorrected, will end up printing with this unacceptable banding, and make it print like this using the combined powers of Illustrator and Photoshop. All right, so obviously we've made a lot of progress. We've gone from this uncorrected output to something more along the lines of this image right here. Problem is we still have some banding inside the petals. I figure if we're going to have color distinctions, they should not occur inside the petals, but rather between one row of petals and the next. And one way to achieve this effect is to add a gradient layer inside Photoshop. And if you're a member of the lynda.com online training library, I show you you how to do exactly that in a follow-up movie. If you're waiting for next week's free technique, I'm going to show you how to average the frames inside of a noisy movie, such as this one right here that I captured with a GoPro, in order to create this super smooth still photograph using the mean stack mode in Photoshop. Deeks techniques each and every week. Keep watching. In this movie, I'll show you how to further address any residual banding issues that you're experiencing when printing an extremely colorful piece of artwork that contains lots of gradients like this one right here, by adding a gradient layer to a very select portion of the artwork here inside Photoshop. So imagine that this is, of course, the original version of the artwork that I created in Illustrator, but if uncorrected, it outputs like this. And I'm using a state-of-the-art Epson R3000 and the best quality paper possible. And yet this is what things end up looking like. It's too dark and we have this severe banding between the blues and the purples. So depending on your printer, you may get an entirely different result. But what we want is to achieve something along the lines of this image right here. So this is the final printed version of this artwork when it's all together corrected and we have these nice smooth transitions, as you can see. But let's say, thanks to the adjustment layers you applied in the previous movie, you're still getting a little banding as indicated by this effect right here. So we still have a little bit of banding between the blue and the purple, not nearly as much as we had before. So you may look at it and think, well, this is good enough. Or you may figure, no way, this is a deal breaker, I can do better. And the way you can do better is to re-express this area of color using a gradient layer inside Photoshop. And here's how that works. I'll go ahead and switch over to my image so far. So this is the image that I prepared in the previous movie that ends up outputting darker and with a little banding, as we saw just a moment ago. And what you want to do is click on that first brighten layer, which is that levels adjustment layer that increases the gamma value to 1.2, thereby slightly expanding the midtones. And we're going to create a new gradient layer on top of it. But before you do, you want to lift a starter color using the eyedropper. So go ahead and select the eyedropper, or you can press the I key to get to it. And then click in some area of greenish blue right outside the yellow portion of the flower in order to lift a representative color. Then you want to make sure your color panel is up on screen. If not, go to the window menu and choose the color command. And you can see that in my case, the HSB sliders are up. You may not see those, in which case, click on the fly up menu icon in the upper right corner of the panel and choose HSB sliders. And I'm using HSB because it's the easiest way to express colors, in my opinion, inside of Photoshop. That way you can select a color using this hue value. And right now you can see that in my case it's set to 214 degrees, which is a slightly bluish shade of green. I want to make it a little bluer, so I'm going to take that value down. So if you want a more bluish green, you reduce the value. If you want a more bluish blue, then you increase the value. I'm going to take it down to 200 degrees, and then I'll tab down to the brightness value and increase it to 100%, so I want full on brightness. And then I want a slightly reduced saturation value. I'm going to change it to 77%. You might ask, why 77%? Well, that's approximately 3/4, and it's slightly easier to enter because you just tap the 7 key twice than 75%. But you can go your own way. Anyway, that's going to be our starter color. And now we'll create a new gradient layer by going up to the layer menu, choosing new fill layer and choosing gradient. And then I'll go ahead and call this layer smoother because we're smoothing out the color transitions, and click OK. And that's going to bring up the gradient fill dialog box. And what you want to do is change the style of gradient to radial because that's the style of gradient that's at work inside of this artwork. If things don't emanate from the exact center, you might need to drag the gradient around. But my artwork is centered. This is an entirely symmetrical piece of artwork. So I'll click on the new Reset Alignment button in order to put that gradient back in place. And now I'll click on the gradient bar to bring up the gradient editor. We want the gradient to be entirely opaque. So select this last opacity stop that has an opacity value of 0%, thereby making it transparent, and drag it down to get rid of it. And now we want the gradient to transition from this bluish green at the start to red at the end, because out at the corners of the artwork, it is red. So I'll go ahead and double click on this final color stop, change the hue value to 0 degrees, which is red, take the saturation value all the way up to 100% and leave the brightness value set to 100% as well. Then click OK. And I want the gradient, the bluish portion of the gradient, to align with the outside of my yellow portion of the flower, which we can see by virtue of the adjustment layers on top of this layer. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this guy out over to the right until the location value becomes 30%, at which point you can see that the blue-green is now aligned at the proper location, and I'll click OK. Problem is we have way too much red. We need to send the red farther out there by increasing the scale value, and I'm going to click inside the scale value and press Shift up arrow until I'm satisfied with what I see, which happens at a scale value of 150%, at which point you can go ahead and click OK in order to accept that starter gradient. Now, if I were to turn off the gradient for just a moment, we can see that we really want the gradient to occur just inside this region here. That is between the yellow portion of the flower, we don't want it to be affected, and the outside of that fifth row, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is where the banding is actually happening. So I'll go ahead and turn that smoother layer back on. Then I'll switch to my paths panel, because you may recall in the previous movie we created these paths from Illustrator. So we took them from Illustrator, pasted them into Photoshop. Go ahead and select those from AI paths. Switch back to the layers panel. With the smoother layer selected, drop down to the Add Layer Mask icon at the bottom of the Layers panel and press the Control key or the Command key on the Mac and click on it. And that way you will convert your standard gradient layer to a vector-based shape layer in the shape of the path outlines that you just selected. All right, now we want to create some intermediate colors inside this gradient. We need more than just this greenish blue and ultimately the red. So double-click on the thumbnail for the smoother layer to bring up the gradient fill dialog box, then click on the gradient bar to bring up the gradient editor. And we're going to add a bunch of intermediate colors, starting very close to the first color stop. So click close to it like so. And we want the location to actually be 32%. And I just figured this out by trying really hard. In other words, quite a bit of trial and error. And so now I'll double click on this new color stop. I accidentally double clicked on the old one, so that's no good. So I'll cancel out and I'll double click on the new one. And you can see that it's selected because its little roof is black instead of white. And now click on the hue value and take it up to 220 degrees, which makes the color that much bluer. And we're going to take the saturation value down to 50%. So here's the thing. Even though it looks like we have more banding here on screen, we're actually going to reconcile the banding in print, because one of our problems in this region of blue here is the colors are so hypersaturated that they just fall outside of the printable gamut. And so if we take the saturation down a little bit, we should have better results. Now I'll click OK in order to accept that swatch. And now we need to keep adding additional color swatches with higher hue values so that we're traveling through the blues to the violets and so forth. So I'll go ahead and click right about here. And I want the location of this color stop to be 35%. Now I'll double click on it to bring up the color picker dialog box, and I'll take the hue value up to 230 degrees. So just slightly higher. Saturation value of 50% is fine, and the brightness of 100% is fine as well. Click OK. And now we'll want to add another color stop right about there, let's say at 40%, which is to say I nailed it that time. I'm going to double click on this swatch, and we want to take the hue value up to 240 degrees. That's absolute blue, by the way, as you can see here. And now I'm going to take the saturation value up slightly to 77%. So that same 77% we used earlier. Click OK. Again, it looks like we're introducing a ton of banding. We're actually taking the banding out for print purposes because we're reducing the amount of saturation that's involved with these colors. All right, now I'll create another color stop right about here. Actually, I want the location value to be 48%. Seems to work best. Double click on a color stop. Change the hue value to 255 this time. And you can see we're starting to make the color more purple. And I'm going to take the brightness value down to 77% this time. Just to reduce the saturation, it turns out that much more. And you'll see why this effect reconciles the way it does in just a minute. I'll go ahead and click OK and create one final color stop, this time at a location of 60%. Double click on that color stop and change the hue value to 270 degrees. That's violet, by the way. And I'll take the brightness value back up to 100%. A saturation of 77% is fine. Then click OK. And now we're done editing the gradient, so you can click OK to back out of these dialog boxes as many times as it takes. All right, now you can see that is hardly the effect we want. We've introduced all kinds of color bands, of course. But we're going to get rid of them by changing the blend mode for this layer from normal to color. And that way we're just affecting the colors and we're letting the original luminous levels show through. And we end up getting a remarkably better effect. So this is what the illustration looks like without that layer. This is what it looks like with that layer. And a point that I want to drive home here is that we've actually displaced the transition between the blues and the purples. So originally, that transition is happening in that fifth row right about here. What we need to do, of course, in order to get things to print more smoothly, is stretch that transition outward. So what I did was I compressed the transition from the greenish blues, to the straight-on blues, and then stretched out the transition from the blues to the violets, which is what we've done with this gradient. So if I turn it back on, you can see that now the blues have backed up to essentially the third row instead of the fifth one. So we're stretching out that area there, which will hopefully result in less banding. And I've compressed the green blues to the blues in these first three rows. We've got the blend mode set to color, but we want to kind of blend things a little more. So I'm going to switch to the rectangular marquee tool, and then I'll tap the 5 key to reduce the opacity of this layer to 50%, as you can see in the upper right corner of the layers panel. And we end up with this final effect here. And what that's going to do for us, even though it looks all washed out when compared to the original version of the artwork right here, what's going to happen when we print this document is it's going to darken up considerably, as you're seeing right here, and we're going to get rid of just about all of the banding. So to make my point clear here, I'll go ahead and press the F key a couple of times in order to fill the screen with the image. This is how the image looks on screen, and this is how it's going to output, thanks to the fact that a typical screen is set way too bright for print previewing, and the fact that a typical inkjet printer is achieving wonderful colors by laying on a ton of ink, which further darkens your artwork, which is why it's so great that you can compensate and get exactly the results you want using a handful of adjustment layers as well as a gradient layer here inside Photoshop. Hey gang, this is Deke McClelland. Welcome to Deke's Techniques. This week, we're going to take a bunch of noisy frames from a movie file, in this case as captured with a GoPro Hero 4 at night, but you could just as easily be using a cell phone or what have you. And we are going to blend them together to create this noiseless still image right here. And we'll be doing so using the mean stack mode. Now, when I say mean, I don't mean it's a jerk. I mean we're running a statistical mean, as in an average. Now, a note about stack modes. If you have Photoshop CC, you got them. But if you're using Photoshop CS6 or earlier, then you need the extended version of the software. With that in mind here, let me show you exactly how it works. Just to recap, this is an example of an image that we're going to start with. And here's how we're going to eventually end, making this one of the more stunning Photoshop transformations that it's my pleasure to share with you. Now, the first thing we need to do is open the movie by going up to the File menu and choosing the Open command. And I'm going to open this guy right here, GoPro Hero 4 movie.mp4, and then I'll go ahead and click on the Open button in order to both open the movie and the timeline panel down here at the bottom of the screen. Now, you can change how big that movie preview right here appears inside the timeline by dragging the slider down at the bottom of the window. And you can also frame through the movie by clicking on this Frame Forward button. And you'll find that in all, we have just 15 frames. So you don't want too many frames. And of course, you want to make sure your camera is pointed at the same object throughout the sequence. Now, the next thing we need to do is convert the frames to layers. And you can do that by clicking on a little flyout menu icon in the upper right corner of the panel. And then you want to choose Convert Frames and finally choose this command right here, Flatten Frames into Clips. And you'll end up with a layer for each and every frame inside the movie. And notice that it ends with frame 14, which might lead you to believe that we only have 14 frames. But in fact, if you scroll your way down, you'll find that there's a frame 0. So when you count frames 0 through 14, you end up with a total of 15 in all. Now, we no longer need the video, so go ahead and click on that flyout menu icon once again and choose Delete Timeline in order to get rid of it. And then you can go ahead and double-click on the Timeline tab to collapse the panel. And then finally, click on Video Group 1 down here at the bottom of the Layers panel and press the backspace key here on the PC or the delete key on the Mac to get rid of it. All right, now what you want to do, just to get a sense of what's going on with these various frames, Alt-click or Option-click on the eye in front of frame 0, and go ahead and click on that layer to make sure it's selected as well. And now you can press Alt-right bracket or Option-right bracket on the Mac in order to frame through these layers. So notice that not only is the ocean moving, but the scene is moving as well, especially right there when we go from frame 14 back around to frame 0. You can see that that's a big change in the horizon right there. And that's because, of course, I was holding the camera on a boat. So what we need to do is select all of these frames and align them. So once again, Alt-click or Option-click on the eye in front of frame 0 or whatever layer is active. And then select all the layers by going up to the Select menu and choosing the All Layers command. And that will select every one of those 15 layers here inside the Layers panel. Next, go up to the Edit menu and choose Auto Align Layers. And you can go ahead and leave Projection set to Auto. You don't need to turn on either the lens correction checkboxes. So really all you need to do is click OK. And that will go ahead and align the various layers with each other. Now this is going to take a moment or two. You will see a progress bar. And now, if you were to click on frame 0 to make it active and Alt or Option click on its eye, you can press Alt-right bracket or Option-right bracket on the Mac to advance through those layers. And notice, even though the shape, the external shape that is, of each and every layer is going to change, the island in the background is going to remain more or less stationary. All right, now, quite obviously, we need to crop the scene. And you want to crop it pretty tight so that you're cropping away the blank area of every single frame. And you can do that by selecting the crop tool. Make sure that the Delete Cropped Pixels checkbox up here in the options bar is turned off. It may be turned on by default, so you have to watch that one. And then go ahead and drag the upper left corner, let's say, and then the bottom right corner inward like so. And at the end of the day, I want this image to be about 2,800 pixels wide. If you can't quite make that work, don't worry about it. We can follow up with the canvas size command in just a moment. I'll go ahead and drag this edge down a little bit as well. And this is looking pretty good. So I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac to crop the canvas size. Note, because we turned off the Delete Cropped Pixels checkbox, we are not cropping the layers themselves. So we can always bring back that big layer data. All right, now what you want to do, just to make sure that we have the right canvas size, is to go up to the Image menu and choose the Canvas Size command. And then make sure that the relative checkbox is turned off and the width and height values are set to pixels, at which point you want to change the width value, again, only if you're working along with me, to 2,800 pixels. And then I'm going to take the height value down to 1,600 pixels and then go ahead and click OK. In order to change the canvas size, again, we're not clipping away a single pixel in any of these free floating layers. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so that we can see all of the noise inside this image. Now, to remove that noise, what we need to do is combine all of the layers into a smart object and then apply an averaging stack mode to all of the layers. So the first step is to select all the layers. And again, you can do that by pressing Control-Alt-A or Command-Option-A on the Mac. You want to make sure all of the layers are visible as well. So find the eyeball, wherever it may be, and then Alt or Option click on it to turn on all the layers. And now go ahead and switch over to the rectangular marquee tool and then right click inside the image window and choose Convert to Smart Object. And that's going to combine all of these layers into a single smart object as you're seeing here. Now it's probably going to be called frame 14. I'm going to go ahead and rename this layer 15 frames because that's more representational of its content. Now to apply that stack mode I was telling you about, go up to the layer menu, choose Smart Objects, then choose Stack Mode. Most people don't even know these options are available to them. And then you can try out one of two modes, either Median, which is going to find the middle color of all of the stacked pixels, or Mean, which is going to find the average. I'm going to go with Mean because it generally gives you the best results. And then after a few moments of averaging those frames, you're going to see a much less noisy image like this right here. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so we can see the tremendous difference here at 100% view size. I'll go ahead and press Control Z or Command Z on a Mac. This is the original top layer in the stack. So you can see it's extremely noisy. And then if I press Control or Command Z again, this is the result of averaging the noise across the 15 frames in order to achieve a remarkably smooth photograph. All right, now, if you thought that was amazing, wait till next week when we take what we have so far, and I urge you to look at it closely. Notice what a colorless shot this is, and we turn it into this luminous scene right here. What's a little black magic between friends? Deeks Techniques each and every week. Keep watching. Hey gang, this is Deke McClelland. Welcome to Deeks Techniques. Now you know it's almost Valentine's Day, and what could be more romantic than a tropical island? Which is why last week I showed you how to merge a bunch of noisy frames from a GoPro movie in order to create this smooth image here. This week, we're going to develop that image and smooth it out further using the Camera Raw filter that's included with Photoshop CC. And then in the end, we're going to bring out the color. Doesn't it just make you want to run away with Photoshop? Come on, let me show you how. All right, here's the final version of the image, just so you have a chance to see it on screen. Alas, we're going to be starting inside of this image here. I'll press the F key in order to switch away from the full screen mode, followed by Control 0 or Command 0 on the Mac to center my zoom. Now, if you take a look at the Layers panel, you'll see that we have this layer called 15 frames. It's actually a smart object, as indicated by this tiny page icon in the lower right corner of its thumbnail. Also notice that we have a down-pointing arrowhead over on the right side of the panel. If I click on it, I'll expand the layer to reveal this mean stack mode that I applied to those 15 video frames in order to get rid of the noise. Now, the fact that we're working with the smart object means we can apply smart filters, and the first one that I need to apply is adaptive wide angle, which is going to help me get rid of this curvature that we're seeing along the horizon. And you might notice that the horizon is slightly crooked as well. So I'll go up to the filter menu and choose adaptive wide angle in order to bring up this gargantuan dialog box right here. And it might seem a little intimidating at first, but it's pretty easy to use. All we need to do is draw a line across that horizon like so, and it should pretty well trace the horizon all the way across. So you may not want the line to be too wide because that may mess things up. So I'll make it about yay wide so it goes all the way underneath the island. And then to make sure that line ends up horizontal, you want to right-click on it and choose horizontal like so, and the line will become yellow instead of cyan. At which point you can go ahead and click OK in order to apply that filter, and you will now see the filter listed here as a smart filter inside the Layers panel. And just to give you a sense of what we've done, it's pretty subtle, but if I press Control Z or Command Z on a Mac, that's the image before the smart filter. And then if I press Control or Command Z again, we see the effects of the adaptive wide angle modification. All right, we don't need this filter mask, so I'll go ahead and right-click inside that white thumbnail and choose Delete Filter Mask, just to free up a little room here inside the Layers panel. Now we want to develop the image in Camera Raw, and you do so here inside Photoshop CC by going up to the Filter menu and choosing Camera Raw Filter. Now, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit so that we can see the island a little more closely. And as you can see, the image is pretty dark, so I'll click in the exposure value and press Shift up arrow in order to increase the exposure to plus 0.5, and that brightens the image pretty nicely. Now I'll tap to the contrast value and take it up to plus 30. And to make sure that we're keeping this sunset in the background, I'm going to take the highlights value down pretty dramatically, all the way down to negative 80. And I'm also going to reduce the shadows value down to negative 30, which does a pretty remarkable job of bringing back that sunset. Of course, it also dramatically darkens the sea, which we'll address in just a moment. Now I'm going to click in the clarity value, and I'll press Shift up arrow 3 times in order to increase it to plus 30, and I'll take the vibrance value up to plus 50, and then I'm going to take the saturation value up to 20, and that's going to give us some nicely saturated colors, as you're seeing here. As I was saying, the ocean is too dark, and I'm going to lighten it up using the graduated filter. So I'll go ahead and select the graduated filter tool up here in the horizontal toolbar. And what you want to do, if you're working along with me, is just go ahead and click the plus sign over here to the right of the exposure slider, and that'll take that exposure value up to plus 0.5, and it'll zero out all the other values. Now go ahead and drag from about the bottom of the reflection of the island, which is more or less here, and drag up while pressing the Shift key. And that'll constrain the angle of that graduated filter line to exactly vertical. Go ahead and release when you hit the horizon. And then, of course, release the Shift key after you finish dragging. Now, I want things to be brighter still, so I'll go ahead and press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac to zoom out. And I'll click inside the exposure value and press Shift-up arrow 3 times in order to increase that value to plus 2.0. All right, now I'm going to switch back to the Zoom tool so I can regain access to my basic settings here. Now, my whites are far too bright, as you can see demonstrated over here on the left side of the image. So I'm going to go ahead and take this whites value down to -15. Seems to work out well. And that way we're not blowing any highlights in this region over here. And then I'm going to tab down to the blacks value, and I'm going to take it down to -40 so that we have a little more contrast. Now, as you can see here, we're bringing out the noise, especially in the shadows down here toward the bottom of the image. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my detail panel. And just to make that noise as obvious as possible, I'm going to increase the sharpening amount to 150. And then I'm going to take the detail value down to 0. And you can see, while that sharpens the image, it also does a real number on that noise. To defeat the noise, go ahead and increase the luminance value to 77. That's what looked good to my eye anyway. And then I took the luminance detail value down to 0 so that we're getting rid of as much noise as possible. And finally, because we have these color variations here inside the water, we've got some purples and some greens, I'm going to increase the color noise reduction value to 50, and I'm going to leave the other color values set to 50 as by default. And that pretty much does it. So I'll go ahead and click OK in order to accept those modifications, and we end up with this fairly magical effect here. Now at this point, if you zoom in, you can see that we have some pretty murky details. In other words, the image needs more sharpness. So I'll go up to the filter menu and choose Sharpen, and then choose Smart Sharpen, which I should warn you works a little differently in Photoshop CC than it does in CS6 and earlier. For example, I'm able to expand the dialog box so I can see more of the image inside of this preview. And the values I came up with are these right here. An amount of 350%, that's going to work regardless of which version of Photoshop you're using. A radius of 4.0 combined with remove set to lens blur, by the way. If you're using Photoshop CS6 or earlier, you're going to want to crank that radius value a little bit higher to 5 or 6 pixels. And then finally, I've got this reduce noise option here inside Photoshop CC, and I've gone ahead and taken it up to 50% in order to defeat some of the remaining noise inside the image. And now I'll click OK in order to accept that change. And you can see if I zoom in here and press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac, those are my original murky palm fronds up there at the top of the island. And then if I press Control-Z or Command-Z again in order to reapply the filter, you can see that we have much better detail. Now, anytime you sharpen an image, you want to go ahead and double-click on this slider icon, and that will bring up the Blend Options dialog box. It will take a moment, however, so you will see a progress bar on screen. But once the dialog box comes up, go ahead and change the mode from normal to luminosity, and that way you're sharpening the luminance information independently of the colors. And then click OK to apply that change. Now, it's not going to make that much of a difference inside of this image, but inside of a different image that you may be working on, it might make a very big difference indeed. Now, at this point, you can add any cornball message you like. In my case, I have this text group that's available at the top of the Layers panel. You can't quite see that text here inside the video, however, until I press the F key a couple of times in order to switch to the full screen mode. And then I'll go ahead and press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac to center my zoom. And that, my friends, is how you develop a sweetly romantic tropical island using a combination of adaptive wide angle, the camera raw filter, and Smart Sharpen here inside Photoshop. All right, so far so good, but we still need to bring out the Caribbean blue. And if you're a member of the lynda.com online training library, I'll show you how to do exactly that in a sweetly romantic special Valentine's Day follow-up movie. If you're waiting for next week's free movie, by request, I'm going to show you how to create chiseled type inside Photoshop. Deeks Techniques each and every week. Keep watching.